The first crack split the mountain air before anyone identified the source. Then the team's best sniper dropped. No warning, no time to react. And the outpost went from controlled to catastrophic in under 4 seconds. Enemy fighters were already moving through the rocks below, disciplined, fast, coordinated. The Marines at Raven Ridge had trained for ambushes. They had not trained for this. Their shooter down, their position exposed, their radio crackling with voices that couldn't help them in time. Nobody noticed Corporal Emma Brooks moving toward the abandoned rifle. Nobody thought she mattered. That was the last mistake they ever made about her. If this story already has you gripping something, hit that like button, drop your city or country in the comments, because I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Subscribe and stay close, because what happens next in parts 2 through 5 will change how you think about strength, silence, and the most dangerous thing a person can carry: a secret. The supply run that morning had been routine, which, at Raven Ridge, meant it was only moderately miserable. Corporal Emma Brooks drove the last kilometer of the resupply route with her window cracked despite the cold, because the alternative was smelling the diesel fumes that leaked from the vehicle's failing exhaust seal. Nobody had fixed it. She had submitted the maintenance request twice. The second time, Sergeant Dale Pruitt had looked at the form, looked at her, and dropped it onto a stack of papers on his desk without a word. That was how most interactions with Pruitt went. Emma parked the MRAP at the south loading bay, killed the engine, and sat for a moment in the sudden quiet. The ridge stretched in every direction beyond the wire. Gray-brown rock faces broken by sparse scrub pine, ridge lines that looked serene from a distance and became genuinely hostile the moment you put boots on them. She had been stationed here for 7 months. She knew the terrain the way you learn a difficult person, not through warmth, but through repeated, careful attention. She climbed down and started pulling crates. Brooks. Specialist Tariq Okafor appeared at the bay door, clipboard in hand, not quite making eye contact. He was 22, earnest in the way young soldiers sometimes were before the weight of a place fully settled on them. "You're short 2 cases on the 7.62. "I know, supply depot was low, I flagged it in the manifest." "I know what Pruitt's gonna do." She lifted a crate onto the dolly. "Log it anyway." Okafor wrote something down, hesitated. "You doing all right?" Emma glanced at him. The question surprised her slightly, not because it was intrusive, but because people here didn't usually ask it. "I'm fine." "Why?" "You just—" He stopped. "Never mind." "Tariq, you look tired." "I am tired." She moved another crate. "But I'm fine. Different things." He nodded and went back inside. Emma kept working, methodical, efficient, invisible in the way that people who do logistical work in combat environments often become invisible. She was the ammunition specialist. She moved bullets from one place to another. She maintained inventory. She filed requests that were frequently ignored. She had been doing this for 7 months at Raven Ridge and for 14 months before that at 2 other postings, and she was, by every metric her command cared to measure, unremarkable. She preferred it that way. The morning briefing was at 08:30 in the operations room. A prefab structure bolted to the main outpost building, its walls covered in maps and printed photographs and handwritten notations in 4 different colors of marker. Emma attended because ammunition specialists were expected to attend briefings. She stood at the back, near the door, and listened. Lieutenant Colonel Warren Hobbs ran the briefings. He was a compact, efficient man with close-cropped gray hair and the particular exhaustion of someone who had been managing incomplete information in difficult terrain for too long. He was not unkind. He was also not the kind of officer who thought much about the people standing at the back near the door. "Enemy activity in Sector 7 has escalated over the last 72 hours, Hobbs said, pointing to the northeastern quadrant of the largest map. "We've had 3 attempted perimeter probes, 2 of which were likely reconnaissance. Intel suggests a coordinated assault is being planned, timeline unclear. We're adjusting our patrol rotations and pulling an additional sniper team to cover the northern approach." Gunnery Sergeant Cole Vickers, the team's primary sniper, was leaning against the far wall with his arms crossed and his eyes half closed. He was tall, rangy, with the kind of relaxed confidence that comes from being very good at something for a very long time. He had been at Raven Ridge for 4 months, and in that time had earned a reputation that preceded him into every room he entered. "Vickers, you'll take primary overwatch on the ridgeline tonight. Hendricks on secondary." Vickers opened one eye. "What's the wind reading up there?" "Averaging 12 knots out of the northeast, gusting to 18. "That's manageable." He closed the eye again. Emma had been watching Vickers without appearing to watch him. She did this sometimes, observing the way he held his body, the small adjustments he made when someone mentioned specific distances or wind conditions. It was involuntary, a habit from a life she had spent years trying to stop living. After the briefing, as people filtered out, she heard Pruitt behind her. "Brooks?" His voice had the flat, slightly contemptuous edge he used exclusively with her. "I need the inventory reconciled by 1400. "I already submitted it this morning." "Resubmit it. There were errors." She turned to look at him. Pruitt was heavy-set, mid-40s, with small eyes that had a way of communicating dismissal before his mouth opened. He had never, in 7 months, acknowledged that she had done anything correctly. She had learned early on that arguing with him cost more than it returned. "I'll take another look at it," she said. "See that you do." He walked past her without waiting for a response. Okafor appeared at her elbow. "For the record," he said quietly, "the inventory was perfect. I checked it myself before I gave it to him." "I know." "So why are you going to resubmit it?" "Because I don't feel like spending the next week dealing with whatever he'd do if I pushed back." She started walking. "Pick your battles, Tariq." "That's depressing." "That's Tuesday." The attack came 23 minutes into the night shift, which was the kind of timing that suggested the enemy had been watching patrol rotation patterns for longer than anyone had assumed. Emma was in the supply depot, a reinforced room in the Outpost's eastern wing, running the resubmitted inventory when the first explosion hit. It was distant enough to register as sound before sensation, a compression in the air that made the fluorescent light flicker and sent a thin cascade of dust from the ceiling joint. She was on her feet before her brain finished processing it. The radio on the shelf crackled. Contact north, Yacht. Sector 7, multiple..." And then a burst of static and voices overlapping and someone calling a grid coordinate twice. She grabbed her kit from the wall hook, helmet, vest, sidearm, and moved into the corridor. Other personnel were already moving, some with the focused urgency of people who knew exactly where they were going, others with the slightly widened eyes of people catching up to what was happening. She fell in with the flow, heading toward the north perimeter. Outside, the air smelled of cordite and cold rock. Tracer fire was crossing the northern sky in thin orange lines, and somewhere on the ridge above, automatic weapons were producing a sound like tearing canvas. Emma moved along the interior wall toward the northern observation post, keeping low, reading the geometry of the incoming fire. The radio on Okafor's vest, he had appeared beside her, breathing hard, announced, "Vickers is down. Repeat, Vickers is down. We have no overwatch on the northern approach." Emma stopped. The words sat in the air around her with a specific weight. Vickers down, no overwatch. Enemy moving through Sector 7 on the northern approach, which meant they were trying to flank around the ridgeline and hit the outpost from an angle that the primary defensive positions hadn't been set up to cover. "What do we do?" Okafor said. "Get to your position." She was already moving, but in a different direction than before, angling toward the north tower, where Vickers had set up his equipment before going to the ridge. "Brooks, that's..." "Get to your position, Tariq." She climbed the external staircase of the north tower at a pace that wasn't quite running, one hand on the railing because the metal was slick with the night's moisture. The tower was a concrete platform with a chest-high wall and a covered position at the northern corner. Vickers had left his secondary kit here. An AMR, a Barrett M107A1, .50 caliber, already set up on a bipod, oriented north-northeast toward the approach corridor. Emma took position behind it. She did not think about what she was doing. If she had stopped to think about it, she might have stopped. Through the night vision scope, the northern approach lit up in green-white thermal contrast. She counted moving figures, 7, 8, more behind them. and identified the machine gun position that was providing suppressive fire for their advance. It was set up in a rock formation about 940 meters out. Two operators, a weapon that had been chewing through the outpost's north wire for the past 4 minutes. Her hand found the adjustment turret without looking. Wind out of the northeast. Gusting to 18, average 12. The same numbers from the morning briefing. The temperature drop since sunset meant air density shift of roughly. She let the calculation run without forcing it, the way you let a familiar language surface rather than translating it. She dialed in the correction. Then she breathed out slowly, put her eye to the scope, found the machine gun position, and pulled the trigger. The Barrett's recoil was substantial, a full-body event rather than a shoulder event, but she had already rolled into it, and the round was downrange before the weapon had fully settled. She worked the bolt and shifted without looking away from the scope. The machine gun position went silent. She was already moving to the next target. What happened over the following 9 minutes would be described differently by different people who witnessed it, and the differences would depend largely on where they had been standing and what angle they had on the North Tower. Okafor would later say it was the most systematically executed defensive fire he had ever seen. Private First Class Dela Cruz, who had been manning the North Wire, would say it felt like the ridgeline had suddenly decided to fight back. Hobbs, reviewing the footage from the tower's fixed camera, would say almost nothing for a long moment before asking someone to play it again from the beginning. What the camera recorded was this. Emma Brooks, ammunition supply specialist, corporal, 7 months at Raven Ridge, took position behind a sniper weapon she had not been issued and did not officially know how to operate. She fired 17 rounds in 9 minutes, each one placed with a deliberateness that the camera's resolution couldn't fully capture, but the results made clear. She neutralized the machine gun position. She eliminated 2 figures moving along the eastern rock face who had been positioning to flank the wire from a direction that the current defensive layout had no good answer for. She identified and engaged an RPG team that had set up at approximately 1,100 meters and was preparing to fire on the outpost's main building. When she fired the last shot, the northern approach was quiet. The attack had not stopped because the enemy had been defeated. It had stopped because the force attacking the northern corridor had no longer had the fire superiority they needed to continue, and they had made the tactically correct decision to withdraw. Emma stayed behind the scope for another 3 minutes, scanning. Then she stood up, stepped back from the weapon, and sat down with her back against the tower wall. Her hands were not shaking. She noticed this with a kind of detached curiosity. They should have been. She sat there for a while, listening to the radio chatter of the aftermath. Casualty reports, perimeter checks, the lieutenant colonel's voice asking for a full accounting. The cold had worked its way into her vest. She could smell the weapon's discharged rounds, a smell that was, in spite of everything, familiar to her in the way that uncomfortable things can be familiar. She heard boots on the staircase. More than one person. Hobbs came through the tower access point first. He stood looking at the weapon, at the brass on the floor, at her. His expression was not easy to read, which was one of the qualities that made him effective at his job. Behind him, Pruitt. His expression was considerably easier to read. "Corporal Brooks," Hobbs said. "Sir." "Walk me through what happened." She told him precisely and without unnecessary detail. She had heard the radio call about Vickers. She had assessed the position of the secondary kit. She had taken the shot on the machine gun team because they were the most immediate threat to the North Wire. She had continued engaging because the attack was ongoing. She had stopped when the attack withdrew. Hobbs listened to all of it. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" The question sat in the air between them. "Sir, that's not a conversational question, Corporal. That is a direct inquiry. Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Pruitt, behind him, made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "She's an ammo hauler, Colonel. She probably got lucky. The camera will show us—" "Sergeant Pruitt." Hobbs's voice didn't change volume. "I will ask you to be quiet for approximately 2 minutes." Pruitt closed his mouth. Emma looked at the floor, then at the lieutenant colonel. She had spent 7 months building a particular kind of invisibility, and she could feel it dissolving around her in real time, the way ice does when the temperature shifts. Not dramatically, just steadily, and without any way to reverse it. "Competitive shooting," she said. Long range. I did it for a long time. How long? Since I was 8 years old. Hobbs was quiet for a moment. Competitive or national level, some international. My father was my trainer. He was also... She stopped. He taught marksmanship professionally. And you're here as an ammunition specialist. Yes, sir. Hobbs looked at her for what felt like a long time. He had the quality of a man who was reorganizing something in his head, quietly and without announcing it. We'll debrief fully in the morning, he said. Get some rest. Sir? He turned and went back down the stairs. Pruitt paused in the doorway and looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully decode. Something between suspicion and something else, something more like recalibration. Then he was gone too. Emma sat alone in the tower for a while longer. Below, the outpost was gradually returning to its after-action version of normal. Movement, lights, voices carrying the particular flat tone of people processing something unexpected. The northern approach was dark and still. She looked at the Barrett for a long moment. Then she looked away. The debrief the following morning lasted 2 hours, and Emma answered every question Hobbs and his intelligence officer, Captain Lena Marsh, put to her. Some of the questions were tactical, some were biographical. She answered the tactical ones easily, and the biographical ones carefully, which Marsh noticed and noted without commenting on. After the debrief, Hobbs reassigned her, provisionally, pending formal review, to an augmented role that included maintaining the sniper team's equipment while Vickers recovered. Vickers had taken a round through the left shoulder. He was alive and stable, and according to the corpsman who treated him, furious about it in the way that physically capable people are furious when their bodies fail them. Emma delivered the revised equipment manifest to the sniper team's quarters that afternoon. Hendricks, the secondary shooter, a compact woman from Ohio with a dry, economical manner, looked at the manifest, then at Emma, then back at the manifest. "You're the one from last night?" she said. "Yes." 17 rounds. "Yes." Hendricks studied her with a directness that wasn't unfriendly. "What do you shoot?" Remington's 700-based platform was my primary competition rifle. The Barrett last night was the first .50 I'd fired in the field. "First time under fire?" Emma paused. "Yes?" "You didn't shake." "I know." Hendricks looked at her a moment longer. "That's either a very good sign or a very bad one," she said. "Depends on what you're carrying around." Emma didn't answer that. Hendricks filed the manifest. "Thanks for the equipment report." "Sure." Emma left. In the corridor, she passed Pruitt, who was walking the other direction and did not acknowledge her. She noticed, without particular satisfaction, that his dismissal now had a different quality to it. Less contempt, more unease. He didn't know what to do with her anymore. She had been a predictable quantity. She was no longer. She went back to the supply depot and continued working. 2 days later, Captain Marsh called her into a meeting that was not listed on the day's formal schedule, in a room that was not one of the standard briefing spaces, and introduced her to a man Emma had never seen before. Dark jacket, no insignia, the specific quality of attention that people develop when they have spent years in environments where reading a room quickly was not optional. "Corporal Brooks," he said. "My name is Callum. I work in intelligence." "What kind?" she said. He seemed mildly pleased by the question. "The kind that knows your father's name," he said, "and the kind that has been paying very close attention to a particular enemy sniper operating in this region for the last 18 months. Emma's entire body went still. "His name," Callum said, "is Mikhail Orlov." She knew that name. She had hoped for years that she would never hear it again. The name landed in the room like something physical. Emma didn't move. She had learned a long time ago that the first reaction to certain information was the one that told other people the most about you, and she had learned just as early how to control it. She kept her eyes on Callum and did not let anything cross her face that she didn't choose to put there. But her hands, flat on her thighs where he couldn't see them, pressed harder against the fabric of her uniform. "You know that name," Callum said. It wasn't a question. "I've heard it." "From where?" "My father mentioned it, years ago." She paused. "Once." Callum studied her the way people in his line of work studied things, not with the open curiosity of someone wanting to understand, but with the particular patience of someone looking for what wasn't being said. Captain Marsh, sitting to his left, had a notepad open but hadn't written anything on it yet. "Your father was Garrett Brooks," Callum said. "Yes." He ran a marksmanship training program from 2001 to 2009, primarily civilian competitive shooters. Some contracted government work. He trained shooters, yes. He also, in 2004, participated in a skill exchange program coordinated through a NATO-adjacent humanitarian framework. He trained 3 foreign nationals in long-range marksmanship fundamentals as part of a post-conflict stabilization initiative. Callum set a photograph on the table between them. Mikhail Orlov was one of them. Emma looked at the photograph. Orlov was younger in it, late 30s maybe, with the kind of face that didn't announce much. Dark eyes, a posture that was simultaneously relaxed and watchful. She had never seen a photograph of him before. Her father had described him once, briefly, and then had never mentioned him again, which had told her more than the description itself. The program was intended to build local capacity for defensive operations, Callum continued. Your father believed in it. He trained Orlov for 6 weeks. By the end of the program, Orlov was the best student he'd ever taught. A small pause. Your father's words from his program debrief. Emma looked at the photograph for another moment, then at Callum. What did Orlov do with it? He spent the next 15 years building a professional sniper career in service of 3 different non-state armed groups, in order of increasing sophistication and lethality. He's currently operating in this region as a trainer and a shooter. We believe he is responsible for at least 47 confirmed kills across 4 conflict zones, including 9 coalition personnel. Callum retrieved the photograph. He is very good at what your father taught him. The room was quiet. Why are you telling me this? Emma said. Because of last night. Last night I was in the right place with the right equipment. Last night you fired 17 rounds under combat conditions, in the dark, in a wind that Vickers had flagged as challenging, and you didn't miss. Callum leaned back slightly. Vickers is one of the best we have. He has expressed, through his very significant discomfort, that he does not believe he would have performed as well under identical conditions. Vickers was shot. Vickers was shot after he missed the advance team by approximately 14 inches at 820 meters in those conditions, which is a remarkable performance. Yours was more remarkable. He looked at her steadily. Your father's program files indicated he had one student who outperformed every metric he set. He never named the student in the official documentation. He wrote that the student had requested anonymity. Emma said nothing. He was referring to you, Callum said. She had known he was going to say it. It still felt like something being pulled out of her chest. I was 17, she said. I know. You continued competing until you were 22. National champion at 19 and 20. Competed internationally twice. Then you stopped, changed your legal name through the courts. Your mother's maiden name. The filing shows a personal motivation, no fraud involved. Enlisted under the new name and ended up here. He said it without judgment. He said it like someone reading coordinates. Your father died 8 months before you enlisted. Yes. And you've been carrying ammunition for 14 months instead of doing what you actually know how to do. The bluntness of it surprised her slightly. She had expected more maneuvering. What I know how to do, she said, is win competitions. That's different from, last night wasn't a competition. No. And yet, she looked at him. He looked back. Marsh was still not writing anything. What do you want from me? Emma said. Right now? Nothing. We're gathering information. He stood, which signaled the meeting's conclusion, with a decisiveness that left no room for extension. You should know that Orlov is aware of this region. He may be aware of this outpost specifically, and he may... This is not confirmed. This is analytical inference. He may know who your father was. Emma stood as well. Why would that matter to him? Callum picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. Because, according to your father's own notes, Orlov contacted him twice after the program ended. The second contact, in 2007, was less friendly than the first. Your father described it as he seemed to locate the word reckoning. Orlov had concluded that the skills he'd been given were not the gift your father thought he was giving, and he wanted your father to know that. He moved to the door, then paused. Your father never told you about the contact? No, Callum agreed. He said it was something that was almost but not quite sympathy. Get some rest, Corporal. You'll be hearing from us. He left. Marsh followed, closing the door. Emma stood alone in the room for a moment. The space where the photograph had been on the table was unremarkable. She stared at it anyway. Ouch. Vickers was out of the infirmary in 4 days, which was approximately 3 days faster than the corpsman had told him to expect. He arrived at the North Tower on the 5th morning, left arm in a sling, right hand holding a cup of coffee, and found Emma there running a function check on his Barrett. He watched her for a moment before she acknowledged him. You disassembled it, he said. It was showing feed irregularity. The bolt carrier had debris in the channel. She fitted the component back into position. It's fine now. Vickers sat down on the ammunition case that served as a seat in the tower's covered corner. He was a large man, and the sling made him look slightly lopsided, which he clearly resented. He drank some coffee and watched her finish the reassembly. You know what you're doing with that, he said. It's not complicated once you understand the platform. Most people who say that have never actually done it. He watched the way her hands moved. Economical, no wasted motion. I've been hearing things. I imagine you have. Callum briefed me this morning. Emma glanced up. About what? About you, about Orlov, about the connection. He set the coffee down. He said you were the best shooter your father ever trained. He said my father wrote that. It's different. Is it? She finished the reassembly, ran the bolt, checked the feed, set it down. Your shoulder going to be okay? Surgeon says 8 weeks before I can shoot anything, which means I'm going to be a very unpleasant person to be around for 8 weeks, for the record. He picked up the coffee again. How long have you been hiding? She looked at him directly. Excuse me? That's what I'm calling it. You had this, whatever this is, this ability, and you buried it under supply manifests and ammunition counts and whatever the hell else they have you doing. So I'm asking, how long? The question wasn't hostile. That was what made it harder to deflect. 5 years, she said. Vickers absorbed this. Because of your father. Because of a lot of things. But mostly your father. She didn't answer, which was, in its own way, an answer. I'm not trying to pry, he said, which was partially true. I'm trying to understand what we have here. Because whatever happened 4 nights ago changed the picture. Hobbs knows it. Marsh knows it. Callum especially knows it. He looked at her. And Pruitt is running around acting like nothing happened because admitting you existed as a real person would require him to rethink 7 months of paperwork. Despite herself, something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile. That's an accurate summary. I've dealt with Pruitts my whole career. They make noise until the moment reality proves them wrong, and then they go quiet and hope nobody noticed the noise. He finished the coffee. The question isn't Pruitt. The question is what happens next. Nothing's been decided. Something's always been decided. People like Callum don't have informational conversations. They have set-up conversations. He stood, adjusted the sling. What did Orlov's name do to you when he said it? The question landed without warning. She hadn't expected it from him. It didn't do anything, she said. Vickers looked at her for a long moment. He had the quality of someone who had spent years learning to read distance and stillness, both in terrain and in people. All right, he said. He picked up his jacket. Equipment looks good. Thanks for the bolt carrier. He went back down the stairs. Emma stood in the empty tower, the Barrett on the rest in front of her, the northern approach stretching away under a pale morning sky. The wind was coming from the east today, different than it had been. She put her hand on the weapon, then lifted it away. The outpost's population was small enough that information moved through it the way it moves through any small, closed community, quickly and imperfectly, each transmission adding a layer of interpretation. Within a week of the attack, most of the personnel at Raven Ridge had some version of what had happened in the North Tower. The versions varied in their details, but agreed on the central fact. The supply specialist had picked up Vickers' weapon and done something that nobody had expected. The reactions to this fact sorted themselves into rough categories. There were people, Okafor, Dela Cruz, a few others, who responded with a straightforward and uncomplicated shift in regard. They didn't make a production of it. They just started looking at her differently, asking her opinion on things they wouldn't have asked before, creating a small but perceptible change in the space between her and other people. There were people who were uncertain, caught between two models of her that couldn't coexist, and who dealt with this uncertainty by avoiding direct engagement. And there was Pruitt. Pruitt had gone, as Vickers predicted, quiet. But quiet for Pruitt was not the same as absent. He had the quality of someone who had reorganized his antagonism rather than released it. The same pressure, redirected into administrative friction. He questioned her inventory submissions more frequently. He found procedural issues with her equipment requests. He twice flagged her timekeeping for review, which required her to submit documentation that consumed hours she didn't have. She documented everything and kept working. On the 10th day after the attack, Hobbs called her into his office and told her that her temporary reassignment was being made permanent, effective the following week. She would be maintaining the sniper team's equipment and serving in an augmented role that included field assessment support. Her ammunition duties would be redistributed. "I need to know if you have concerns about the reassignment," he said. "No, sir. It's going to generate friction. I'm aware." He looked at her across the desk with the measured attention he brought to most things. "I've reviewed your father's program files, the portions that were available to me." He paused. "He was a careful documenter, very thorough." "Yes, he was." He wrote about one student at length across multiple years of notes, without naming them. The student first appeared in the records when she was 8. He described her as, Hobbs looked down at a printed page, constitutionally unhurried, which in context I interpreted as a compliment. Emma's throat tightened slightly. She managed it. "It was," she said. He also wrote that she was the only student he ever trained who improved by stepping away from the rifle. He set the page down. He meant it as an observation about her particular learning process, that she absorbed more between sessions than during them. "He told me that once," she said. "I didn't understand it at the time." "What about now?" She thought about the tower, the 17 rounds, the 9 minutes during which she had not thought about her father once, not in any conscious way, and had shot better than she had since she was 22 years old. "I think I might," she said. Hobbs nodded slowly. "Dismissed, Corporal." The package from Callum arrived on the 14th day. Not physically. It came through Marsh in a secured briefing that required a specific clearance level Emma had apparently been granted without her knowledge. She sat in the same room as the first meeting and watched Marsh place a folder on the table. "We've confirmed Orlov's current operational area," Marsh said. She was more direct than Callum, her manner less performatively calm, more openly methodical. "Iron Pass Highlands, roughly 30 kilometers northeast of this position. He's running a training camp. We believe 12 to 15 students, rotating in and out. The camp has been functioning for approximately 8 months. What kind of students? Local fighters primarily, some with existing military background, some without. He's building a sniper capability that doesn't currently exist in this region." Marsh turned a page in the folder. "In the last 2 months, 2 coalition personnel have been killed in adjacent sectors. Both were long-range engagements. Both showed indicators consistent with Orlov's documented methodology." Emma looked at the map Marsh had spread across the table. The Iron Pass Highlands were marked in a topographical overlay. Rugged, elevated, the kind of terrain that offered extraordinary fields of fire in multiple directions and made approach extremely difficult. She had been studying terrain reports for 7 months. She knew the region. "He chose well," she said, almost to herself. "He always does," Marsh said. "Your father trained him to think three-dimensionally about terrain. Orlov extended that into a full operational philosophy. She paused. There's something else. In the last 72 hours, we've received signals intelligence suggesting Orlov is aware of the incident at this outpost. Emma went still. He intercepted some radio traffic, we believe. The details of what was transmitted are unclear, but the analysis indicates he flagged this location specifically. Marsh looked at her steadily. We don't know what he knows. We don't know if he knows who was in the tower that night. But he's paying attention. He's paying attention. Emma looked at the map. The distance between Raven Ridge and the Iron Pass Highlands was manageable in terms of kilometers. In terms of terrain, it was something else. What's the plan? She said. There isn't one yet. That's partly why you're here. Marsh closed the folder. Callum will be back in 4 days. He wants to discuss operational options. Between now and then, I want you to look at these terrain reports and tell me what you see. She slid a second folder across the table. Emma opened it. Satellite imagery, topographical analysis, patrol reports from adjacent units. She scanned the first page, then the second, and felt something she hadn't expected. A kind of focus that was different from the focus she brought to inventory reports. Different even from the focus in the tower. It was the particular cold clarity of a problem she actually knew how to solve. She had spent 5 years not wanting to know how to solve problems like this. I'll look at them, she said. She looked at them for 3 nights straight, spreading the imagery across the floor of her quarters after lights out, working by the narrow beam of her headlamp. She made notes in a small notebook, filling pages with calculations and assessments and questions, and crossed out more than she kept. On the second night, Okafor knocked and came in and sat on the floor across from her, looking at the spread of papers with an expression somewhere between impressed and concerned. You know you're not sleeping, he said. I'm aware. Is this... He gestured at the papers. Is this the thing Marsh had you doing? Related to it. Should I know what it is? Probably not. He was quiet for a moment. Emma. She looked up. The Pruitt thing, he said. The timekeeping reviews. I want you to know that I documented the original entries when you submitted them, both times. If he tries to escalate it, I have copies. She looked at him. He was doing it carefully, the way he always did things. Not making a production, not asking for credit, just laying the information on the floor between them. Thank you, she said. I don't think he's going to stop, Okafor said. I think you doing what you did made him feel something specific, and I think he's going to keep making your life harder until he finds a way to explain what you are that makes sense to him, or until something changes his calculation. What would change his calculation? Emma looked back at the map. The Iron Pass Highlands, 30 kilometers northeast, the camp that Orlov had built in the place her father had taught him to choose. I don't know yet, she said. Okafor left at midnight. She kept working until 3 in the morning, when she finally rolled the maps and turned off the light. She lay in the dark for a while, not sleeping. Her father had told her once, the last winter before everything fell apart, that the hardest part of long-range shooting wasn't the wind calculation or the distance or the trigger discipline. The hardest part, he said, was the period between acquiring the target and taking the shot. The suspension. The moment when you had all the information you needed and had to choose whether to use it. She had never asked him what he meant, precisely, because she thought she understood. She wasn't sure anymore that she had. On the 4th day, Callum returned. He walked into the briefing room with the same dark jacket and the same quality of compressed attention, and he sat down across from her and said, I've read your terrain assessment. And? And we're putting together a team, he said. The operation into Iron Pass is moving forward. Hobbs has signed off. The question is whether you're part of it. Emma looked at him across the table. Outside, the wind had picked up, coming off the ridgeline with the low, continuous sound it made when the pressure shifted. She had learned to read that sound over 7 months. She knew what it meant when it changed. What does Orlov know about who was in the tower? She said. Callum's expression shifted very slightly. A tightening at the corners that she had learned in 4 conversations meant he was deciding how much to give her. We intercepted a communication this morning, he said. 40 minutes ago. Orlov sent a message to an associate in this region. He slid a printed sheet across the table. It's been translated. She looked at the paper. The message was 6 words long. Tell me about Garrett Brooks's daughter. The cold that moved through her then had nothing to do with the mountain air pushing through the window sill, and everything to do with the understanding that the space she had carved out for herself, the invisibility, the silence, the 7 months of careful erasure, was already gone. Orlov knew, and he was asking about her the way a man asks about something he intends to find. She read the 6 words 3 times. Not because she didn't understand them the first time, because she needed the repetition to get ahead of what was happening in her chest. A tightening that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite grief and was probably some third thing she didn't have a clean name for. She set the paper down on the table and pushed it back toward Callum. How did he know? She said. We're not certain. The most likely explanation is that someone intercepted the radio traffic from the night of the attack and identified your name. Another possibility is that he has a source closer to this position than we'd like. Callum retrieved the paper, folded it with the same practiced economy he applied to everything. A third possibility is that he'd already been tracking your father's known associates and family members as a matter of standard intelligence practice. He's been tracking my father's family. It's consistent with his profile. Orlov is methodical. He doesn't leave loose ends. A pause. He also doesn't ask questions unless he already suspects the answer. The phrasing of that message, tell me about, suggests he knows something and wants it confirmed. Emma was quiet for a moment. You said the operation into Iron Pass is moving forward, she said. Yes. What's the objective? Disruption and capture, preferably. The camp represents a long-term threat to regional stability. Orlov specifically represents an immediate threat to coalition personnel. Callum looked at her. Capture is the preference. He has intelligence value that his death wouldn't preserve. And if capture isn't viable, then the operation achieves its secondary objective. She nodded slowly. When? 12 days, weather window, and logistical constraints. He laced his hands on the table. The team is being assembled now. Hendricks will lead the tactical element. 2 additional operators from a unit I'm not going to name, a signals specialist, and a designated marksman. He looked at her. The question is, who fills that slot? You have other options. We have qualified personnel. We don't have anyone who has what you have. He said it without flattery, which made it easier to hear. And we don't have anyone who understands Orlov's methodology the way someone trained by the same instructor would understand it. I was trained by my father. Orlov was trained by my father for 6 weeks. That's not the same foundation. No, but it's a closer mirror than anything else we have access to. He watched her. I'm not asking you to take the shot that ends this. I'm asking you to be on the team that gives us the best chance of a clean outcome. And if Orlov knows I'm there, he may already be expecting it. Emma looked at the table. The map was still spread across it, the Iron Pass highlands marked in their topographical overlay. 30 kilometers of difficult ground between here and whatever Orlov had built in those rocks. She had spent 3 nights with those maps. She knew the approach corridors, the likely defensive positions, the places where the terrain forced you into the open. She also knew, with the particular certainty of someone who had learned to read terrain from the inside out, that Orlov had almost certainly identified the same things from the other direction. I'll be on the team, she said. What? Hobbs called her in the next morning. She had expected it. He was the kind of commander who believed in direct conversation before commitment, who needed to look at the people he was sending out and assess something that didn't appear in any evaluation form. He was standing when she came in, which was unusual. His hands were in his pockets, and he was looking at the map on his wall, the same regional map that had been there for months, marked up with a dozen different operations and incidents. Close the door, he said. She did. Callum told me you agreed to the Iron Pass operation. Yes, sir. He tell you who else is on the team? Hendricks, a signals specialist, 2 additional operators. He didn't name the operators. Their names are Castillo and Rourke. They're good. I've worked with Rourke before. He turned from the map. I want to ask you something, and I want a real answer, not a military answer. She waited. Are you going because you want to stop Orlov, or because you feel like you owe your father something? The question wasn't what she'd expected. She took a moment with it, which he allowed. I don't think I can fully separate those two things, she said. That's honest. He came and sat at his desk, which seemed to signal something, a slight relaxation of formality. The reason I'm asking is that motivation affects performance in ways that manifest when the situation goes sideways, and operations into terrain like Iron Pass go sideways. It's not a possibility, it's a planning assumption. I understand that. Orlov knows that terrain. He's been operating there for 8 months. Whatever approach we use, he has a defensive advantage that our tactical planning can only partially offset. He looked at her steadily. If it goes wrong out there, I need to know that you're going to make decisions based on the mission rather than based on whatever this man represents to you personally. She held his gaze. I'll make the right calls, sir. I hope so. He picked up a pen, set it down. Pruitt filed another administrative review this morning. Your timesheet from last week. The shift in subject was abrupt enough that it almost threw her. I know. I've documented everything. I know you have. I've seen your documentation. He looked at something on his desk that wasn't quite the review form. I'm going to deal with Pruitt when you get back. I want you to know that. Sir, you don't have to. I'm not doing it for you, Corporal. I'm doing it because he's becoming a distraction in an environment where distractions cost lives. He picked up the pen again, this time as a signal that the conversation was concluding. Dismissed. Briefing with the full team is Thursday at 700. The team assembled in the operations room on Thursday morning, and Emma assessed them the way she assessed everything, quietly, from a slight remove, taking in the information before drawing conclusions. Hendricks she already knew. Hendricks she trusted, on the basis of limited but high-quality data. Castillo was in her early 30s, dark-haired, with a compactness that was less about physical size than about the way she managed space. She didn't waste any of it. She had the look of someone who was always running a secondary calculation. Rourke was older, late 40s, with a gray-threaded beard and the unhurried manner of someone who had been in enough rooms like this to have stopped being impressed by them. He looked at Emma when she walked in, assessed her in approximately 4 seconds, and went back to his coffee. The signals specialist was Corporal Jin Yo, 26, visibly the most nervous person in the room, which Emma noted without judgment. Nerves at the pre-mission stage meant investment. It was the people who weren't nervous who sometimes worried her. Callum ran the briefing with Marsh managing the visual materials. They covered approach routes, objective parameters, communication protocols, extraction vectors. They covered what was known about the camp's layout and what was inferred. They covered Orlov's documented tactical patterns, which Callum summarized with a precision that told Emma he had been studying the man for considerably longer than the current operations timeline suggested. When Callum covered the sniper element, he looked at Emma. Brooks will function as designated marksman and terrain analyst. Her primary role is overwatch during the approach and objective phases. Secondary role is target identification, specifically Orlov, who needs to be acquired visually before any engagement decision is made. He paused. Callum's rule, not mine. Orlov does not get engaged at distance unless he is actively threatening personnel. We want him functional. Rourke looked up from his notes. What if he decides he doesn't want to be functional? Then Brooks makes the call. Everyone in the room looked at Emma briefly. She noted the quality of each look. Hendricks, assessment, Castillo, neutral, reserved judgment. Rourke, something harder to read. Yo, something close to concern, which she found slightly endearing. Questions so far? Callum said. Rourke leaned back. The message Orlov sent. 6 words asking about Brooks specifically. That tells me he's not operating blind on this. He knows something is coming, or he suspects it. How does that change our entry calculation? It elevates the probability of a prepared position, Callum said. We're assuming he's been defensive-minded since at least the day he sent that message. So we're walking into terrain he's had at least 12 days to set up. Yes. Rourke looked at Emma again. And he knows she's likely on whatever team comes for him. We believe so. So he's not just defending the camp, he's waiting for her specifically. The room was quiet for a moment. That's the assessment, Callum said. Rourke looked back at his notes without another comment. Castillo wrote something down. Hendricks was watching Emma. Emma said, He's done this before. He identifies a specific threat and shapes his defensive position to account for it. My father wrote about the technique in his program notes. He called it personalized geometry. She paused. Orlov learned it, and he extended it. He'll have set up this camp's perimeter defense with specific sight lines eliminated, knowing that whoever comes will try to use them. The places that look like approach opportunities will be traps. Callum looked at her. You've identified which ones? Some of them. I've marked them in the terrain analysis. She looked around the table. We should go in from the north face. Everyone will assume the east. It's faster and the cover looks better. But the north approach has a ridge shelf at approximately 2,000 meters elevation that gives direct sight lines to the camp's northwestern quadrant, and it's the one approach corridor where the defensive geometry doesn't work in his favor. Castillo looked at the map. The north approach adds 6 hours to insertion. Yes. And it goes through the ice shelf. Yes. A pause. He won't be expecting it, Emma said, because it's the approach that only makes sense if you've studied his setup specifically. And he won't believe we've studied it that closely. She looked at Callum. He'll believe we've studied him. He won't believe we've studied the way he thinks. Callum looked at her for a moment. Then he made a note. North approach, he said. We'll revise the timeline. The 12 days moved with the particular quality of time that precedes difficult things, sometimes accelerating, sometimes stretching, never quite settling into a normal rhythm. Emma spent most of it in training and preparation, running the route calculations until they were automatic, working with Hendricks and Castillo on coordination protocols. She and Rourke didn't talk much, but when they did, it was useful. He had been in terrain like Iron Pass before and had specific knowledge of how ice shelf conditions affected weapon function in ways that weren't fully captured in the standard technical documentation. She listened carefully and adjusted her preparation accordingly. The night before insertion, she couldn't sleep, which she had expected. She sat with the terrain map spread across her floor one more time, not looking for new information. She had all the information there was, but running through the sequence in her head, the way she had learned to run through a shot before she took it, seeing it in full detail, from the first step to the last. Her father had taught her that. She had not thought about him, directly and deliberately, in 5 years. She had thought about him at the edges, his handwriting in the notes she'd studied, his voice in a description that Hobbs had read back to her, his name in Callum's mouth, and now in Orlov's message. But she had kept the direct thinking at arm's length, the way you keep a hand away from a wound that hasn't finished healing. She let herself think about him now. He had been a difficult man to know, which was part of why she had loved him in the particular, complicated way that daughters love difficult men. He was not warm in the ordinary sense. He was precise, demanding, occasionally capable of a silence so extended it felt like its own form of communication. But when he was teaching, when she was behind a rifle and he was beside her, talking through wind and distance and breath, he had been completely present in a way he wasn't present anywhere else. That was the version of him she had learned the most from, and the version she had missed most after he was gone. The argument that ended everything had been about exactly that. She had told him she was done competing. She had told him she wanted a different kind of life than the one built around a scope and a trigger. She had told him that she was 22 years old and she needed to find out who she was without a rifle in her hands. He had not handled it well. She had not handled his handling of it well. 6 weeks later, he had a cardiac event in his workshop, alone, on a Tuesday morning, and she had been 3 states away and had found out 4 hours after the fact, and she had spent the following year constructing elaborate architectural justifications for why the argument had been necessary and correct, and not something she needed to feel the way she felt about it. None of the architectures had held. She rolled up the maps at 2 in the morning and tried to sleep. She got approximately 3 hours, which was enough. But they inserted at 0300 6 people and the equipment they could carry, moving north through darkness and cold that had a physical weight to it, the kind of cold that found the gaps in your gear and occupied them. Yo had the signals equipment in a pack that was visibly too heavy for him, and he carried it without complaint, which went up in Emma's estimation. The north face of the Iron Pass approach was everything the maps had suggested, and several things they hadn't fully conveyed. The ice shelf sections required movement techniques that slowed progress considerably. The rock faces above the shelf had a particular acoustic quality that meant sound traveled in unexpected directions, so the team moved in near total silence, communicating by hand signal, and the occasional whispered exchange on the closed frequency. Emma was on point for the upper section, which had been agreed upon in the briefing. She moved with a deliberateness that Rourke, behind her, later described as watching someone read a landscape out loud. She identified the points where the ice had shifted and the footing was treacherous, the places where the rock overhang created wind shadows that would carry sound upward to any defensive position above. She routed them around both without explaining how she knew. She knew because she had spent 3 nights inside those maps. She knew because her father had spent years teaching her that the ground always told the truth, and that the only question was whether you were patient enough to listen. At 08:47, with the sun barely into the sky and throwing long shadows across the rock faces, they reached the ridge shelf that Emma had identified as the insertion point. She went to the edge and lay flat and looked through the scope. The camp was below and ahead, partially screened by a rock formation that had been augmented. She could see it clearly now, in person in a way the satellite imagery hadn't fully captured, with additional material, timber and stone, creating a defensive wall that looked natural at distance and wasn't. Orlov had been busy. She scanned the perimeter, identified 2 positions, guards or people performing guard functions, moving in a pattern that had the rhythm of trained behavior. She scanned further. There was a larger structure at the camp center, and beyond it, a cleared area that she assessed as a training ground. She was scanning the northern edge of the camp when she found him. She didn't know with certainty it was him. She found a figure in a position that she recognized. Not the person, but the setup. The way the position had been chosen, the relationship between the firing point and the likely approach angles, the specific place where a shooter would sit who understood personalized geometry. Her father had taught her to set up a position like that. She had taught herself to recognize one. She clicked twice on the team frequency, her pre-briefed signal for target identification. Hendricks materialized beside her. "You have him?" "I have someone in a position consistent with him. I can't confirm identity at this distance." Hendricks looked through her own optic. "Northern edge, prone behind the secondary rock formation." "Yes? Can you get closer to confirm?" Emma was already calculating. The ridge shelf dropped steeply on the eastern side, but there was a traverse, narrow, exposed for approximately 40 meters, that would get her to a secondary position 200 meters closer. Better angle, better identification probability, significantly more exposure. "There's a traverse," she said. Hendricks looked at the traverse. "That's 40 meters of open." 38. A pause. "Same thing. I can move it in under 90 seconds. Hendricks looked at her. "If he's watching that traverse, he's watching the eastern approach. That's what the position is designed to do. The traverse is in his blind quadrant. If you're wrong about that, I'm not wrong about that." Hendricks absorbed this. She had learned in 11 days of working with Emma that these assessments were not confidence for its own sake. They were the product of a specific kind of thinking that she didn't fully understand but had learned to credit. "Rourke," she said quietly. Rourke moved up beside them. "Cover the traverse," Hendricks said. "Brooks is moving to the secondary position." Rourke looked at the traverse, looked at Emma. 90 seconds? 85. He got into position. Emma moved. The traverse was exactly 38 meters, and she covered it in 79 seconds, which she knew because she was counting, and she reached the secondary rock formation without drawing fire and without seeing any indication that the figure below had moved or shifted attention. She settled into position and raised the scope. At this distance, she could see him clearly. Mikhail Orlov was older than the photograph. Mid-50s now, a face that had collected weather and time in the particular way of men who spent their lives outdoors in difficult places. He was lying in a disciplined prone, his own rifle oriented toward the eastern approach corridor, exactly where Emma had predicted. He was not moving. He was patient in a way that she recognized, the deep patience of someone who had learned that waiting was a skill, not a deficiency. He was also, she realized, not looking at the eastern approach. He was looking at the ridge shelf, at the exact position she had been in 40 seconds ago, Her entire body locked. He had known, not about the traverse maybe, but about the ridge shelf. He had identified it as the logical insertion point for the northern approach, and he had been watching it, and he had seen her movement, or Hendricks or something, and he was now scanning back, methodical, unhurried. She pressed herself flat and did not breathe. His scope traversed slowly across the ridge shelf. She tracked it, watched it settle, move, settle again. Then his radio crackled. She could hear it faintly at this distance, a technical improbability that the cold and the rock face created by concentrating sound downward. And he said something she couldn't parse, and then three things happened in rapid sequence. The first was that two of his camp guards began moving with purpose toward the eastern approach, which meant he was redirecting attention there, possibly as a feint, possibly because he genuinely believed the primary insertion was eastern. The second was that a burst of gunfire came from the western edge of the camp, which wasn't directed at anything Emma could identify, which meant it was a signal. The third was that Orlov stood up from his position, turned and looked directly at where Emma was lying. Not approximately, not generally in her direction. Directly at her. He was 800 meters away. She was behind cover. She had not moved, had not disturbed the rock face, had made no sound. He looked at her position for approximately 4 seconds. Then he lowered his rifle, pointed it at the ground, muzzle down, the universal signal that is not a combat position. And on the team frequency, Yo's voice came through tight and urgent. "I'm reading radio traffic. They know we're here, multiple positions activating. This is a prepared response. They were waiting for..." And then the eastern approach exploded. Not an IED, a disciplined volley of fire from 3 positions simultaneously, oriented at the eastern approach corridor that Emma had told them not to use, that the camp's entire defensive geometry had been built around, and that none of her team was in. But Orlov didn't know that yet. In the 4 seconds between his signal and the volley, Emma had acquired him in her scope, had made the calculation, 800 meters, wind 3 knots from the northwest, cold air, clear sightline he was standing, and had her finger on the trigger. He was standing with his rifle pointed at the ground, looking at the eastern approach now, watching the volley his camp had just fired. She had the shot. She had it completely and unambiguously. And Hendricks's voice came through the frequency, low and controlled. "Brooks, hold." Emma's finger stayed where it was. "He's standing in the open," she said. "I see that." He dropped his rifle posture. "I see that too." A pause on the frequency that lasted perhaps 2 seconds and felt considerably longer. "He's giving you a shot," Hendricks said. "Question is why?" Emma watched him through the scope. Orlov had not moved. He was standing in the cleared area between the defensive wall and the central structure, rifle at the ground, head turned slightly toward the ridge shelf where he believed she was. Where she had been. 800 meters. She could end the operation right now. "He set up the eastern volley to clear his people from the line of fire," she said, and she heard the realization in her own voice as she said it. He activated his defensive response, and then he positioned himself in the open because he knew that whatever team came in, the marksman was going to be watching him, and he wanted... She stopped. "He wanted what?" Hendricks said. Emma watched Orlov standing in the cold morning air of the Iron Pass Highlands, at the camp he had built in the terrain her father had taught him to choose, with his rifle pointed at the ground and his face turned toward the place where Garrett Brooks's daughter was supposed to be. "He wants to talk," she said. The frequency was silent for a moment. Then Rourke said in a tone that suggested he had seen a great many things in his career and this was still unusual. "He wants to talk." "Yes." Another pause. "Brooks," Hendricks said, "that is either the most tactically sophisticated surrender posture I have ever encountered, or it is the most elegant trap." Emma's eye was still at the scope. Orlov had not moved. Patient, she thought, the deep patience of someone who had learned that waiting was a skill. Her father had taught him that too. "I know," she said, and she held the trigger without pulling it, while 800 meters away, the man who had been her father's greatest student stood in the open mountain air and waited to see what Garrett Brooks's daughter would do. The standoff lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds, which Emma knew because she was counting, the same way she counted everything that mattered. Orlov did not move. The camp around him was tactically active. She could see figures repositioning along the perimeter, could hear the echo of the eastern volley dying across the rock faces. But the center of it, the cleared space where he stood with his rifle at the ground, was absolutely still. He had created a pocket of deliberate calm inside the chaos he'd triggered, and he was standing in the middle of it, waiting. Hendricks came through on the frequency. Castillo has a position on the western guard. Rourke is covering the eastern withdrawal. Yeo is reading their radio traffic. They're confused. The guards don't know what he's doing. He didn't tell them, Emma said. Why not? Because they wouldn't have understood it. A pause. Brooks? He wants direct contact. No intermediaries, no negotiation through channels. He wants to talk to me. She kept her eye at the scope. He's been planning this since he sent that message. That's either impressive or insane. It's both. She watched him. I'm going down. The frequency went briefly silent. Say that again, Hendricks said. I'm going down to the camp perimeter, not inside. I'll stay on the northern edge, outside the wall. He'll come to me. Emma, there are 12 to 15 fighters in that camp, who are currently confused and leaderless because their commander just did something none of them expected. She had already mapped the route from the secondary position to the camp's northern edge, 200 meters of descending rock face, moderate cover, 2 exposure points of approximately 8 meters each. If he wanted to kill me, he had 17 days to plan a better approach than standing in the open with his rifle down. He might want to take you alive. He might. She paused. But that's not what this feels like. What does it feel like? She looked through the scope at Orlov, still standing, still patient, still turned slightly toward the ridge shelf where he thought she was. It feels like someone who's been waiting a long time to have a conversation. That's not a tactical assessment. No, it's not. She pulled back from the scope. Cover me. She heard Hendricks exhale, the specific exhale of someone choosing not to argue against a decision they can't reverse. Rourke, reposition to northwest. Cover the northern edge. Castillo, hold western guard. Yeo, I need continuous monitoring on their internal frequency. Responses came back, clipped and professional. Emma started moving. The descent took 6 minutes and used 3 more than she'd planned because the second exposure section had worse footing than the maps had indicated. Recent ice melt had left the rock face slick in a way that required 2 additional handholds and a route deviation that cost her time and elevation. She reached the northern wall of the camp's perimeter, breathing harder than she preferred, and with a scrape on her left palm from the rock face that she registered and set aside. She pressed against the outer face of Orlov's augmented wall and waited. 20 seconds later, footsteps on the other side. He appeared around the wall's northern edge without haste, without a weapon raised. He had a sidearm holstered and left it there. He was taller than she'd realized from the scope, several inches over 6 feet, and he moved with the particular economy of someone who had long ago made peace with his own body's size and capabilities. He stopped approximately 4 meters from her. They looked at each other. She had the sidearm in her right hand, not raised. She kept it there. You came down from the secondary position, he said. His English was accented but precise. Not the ridge shelf. I was watching the wrong place. You were watching the right place. I moved. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly. A kind of recalibration. The traverse. Yes. I thought about the traverse, he said. I decided it was too exposed to be used. It was exposed. I used it anyway. He looked at her for a moment. Your father would have used it too. The mention of her father, said that simply, with that particular directness, it hit somewhere she hadn't fully armored. She kept her face neutral. What do you want? Many things, he said. Most of them are no longer possible. He glanced at the perimeter wall, then back at her. Your team has control of the approach corridors. Yes. My people don't know this yet. They think the Eastern response was successful. It would have been if anyone had been there. A pause. You told your team not to use the Eastern approach. Yes? Because you knew I'd built the defense around it. Yes. He absorbed this without visible reaction. He was, she thought, a man who had learned to process information in real time without letting the processing show. The same skill her father had taught her, applied to a face rather than a trigger. "I want to ask you something," he said. "You could have sent another message." Messages can be monitored, interpreted, recontextualized by people with different interests. He looked at her steadily. "I wanted to ask you this in person, where no one can edit what I say. Ask. Did your father ever tell you about me?" The question was straightforward in its words and not straightforward in anything else. Emma felt the weight under it, the years of weight, the specific gravity of a man asking whether he had mattered to someone who was gone. "Once," she said. "He mentioned you once. He didn't say much." "What did he say?" "That he'd made an error in judgment about someone, that the error had cost people their lives." She watched him. "He didn't name you. I put the name together later." Orlov was quiet for a moment. The camp behind the wall was audible. Voices, movement, the particular sounds of a fighting force in uncertain alert status. He seemed to be listening to it and not listening to it simultaneously. "He was wrong," Orlov said, "about the error. 47 confirmed kills suggest otherwise. But the error was not teaching me." He said it without defensiveness, which made it harder to dismiss. "The error was believing that what he taught me was the same thing I learned." He paused. "He thought he was giving me a tool. I was acquiring a language. Those are different things." Emma looked at him. "A language for killing. A language for surviving." He met her eyes. "Where I came from, Corporal, survival was not a metaphor. The people I worked for after your father's program, I didn't choose them out of ideology. I chose them because the alternative was what had already happened to everyone around me." He stopped. "I'm not asking for your understanding. I'm providing context." "I don't need your context. I need to know if you're surrendering." Something moved across his face that wasn't quite a smile. "Your father said you were direct." "In the message he sent you, in 2007. The second contact." She watched his reactions. Slight, controlled, but there. "He kept records of everything. I've read them." Orlov looked away for the first time, toward the northern rock faces above them, the same terrain that had taken her 6 minutes to descend. His profile was something she hadn't expected. Not the composite she'd built from intelligence files and her father's notes, but a person. Complicated, visibly tired in ways that had nothing to do with the current operation. "He was angry in that message," Orlov said. "He was. He told me I had taken what he gave me and turned it into something he was ashamed of." "Yes. He was right." He said it simply. "That is why I'm here, standing in the open with my rifle down, having a conversation with his daughter instead of doing the thing I built this camp to be able to do." He looked back at her. "Because he was right, and I have known that for a long time, and I have continued anyway, and at some point the weight of continuing becomes heavier than the weight of stopping." Emma's hand was still on the sidearm. She was aware of Rourke's position on the northwest, covering her. She was aware of the camp's uncertain fighters behind the wall. She was aware of Hendricks monitoring the frequency and the whole fragile architecture of the current situation. "If you surrender," she said, "you're going to be transferred to a facility and debriefed for an extended period. You'll provide intelligence on the network. You'll identify personnel, routes, financial structures. It won't be comfortable. I know what capture involves. And you're still standing here." "I'm still standing here." He looked at her. "There is a condition." "You're not in a position to set conditions." "I know that too." A pause. "I'm asking anyway. The people in this camp, 12 of them, 3 of whom arrived this week and have not yet participated in any operation. I want written assurance that they'll be assessed individually rather than collectively. Some of them chose this the way I chose it. Some of them didn't have another available choice." Emma looked at him. "That's not something I can commit to." "No, but your intelligence officer can. The man in the dark jacket." He said it without particular emphasis, which meant he knew considerably more about the team's composition than their approach had suggested. "If he gives me that assurance in writing, I will walk out of this camp and hand you everything I have. Names, Networks, communication protocols, the training methodology we've been developing, all of it. And if he doesn't? Orlov looked at her steadily. Then I'll shoot first, and your team will have a very difficult morning. The honesty of it was almost bracing. She had expected maneuvering. He was simply telling her the truth about the situation. She clicked twice on the frequency. Hendricks? Monitoring. Get Callum on a line, now. So the negotiation took 40 minutes. Emma stood at the northern wall throughout, Orlov 3 meters away on his side of the conversation, both of them occasionally relaying information through separate channels. Emma to Callum, Orlov to a guard who appeared at the wall's edge twice and disappeared again. Callum's voice on the frequency was controlled and unsurprised in the way of someone who had spent years encountering the unexpected. He asked 4 clarifying questions about Orlov's condition. He was silent for approximately 90 seconds. He came back and said, "Tell him we can provide written assurance on individual assessment for the camp's personnel. It's not a guarantee of outcome, so it's a guarantee of process. Each person will be evaluated on their individual involvement and culpability." Emma relayed this. Orlov considered it for perhaps 10 seconds. "That's honest," he said. "Most people would have promised more. He's a careful man." "Yes." He looked at the wall. "All right." What followed was the most logistically complicated hour Emma had spent since arriving at Raven Ridge. The camp's fighters were assembled. Orlov issued the order himself on his own radio in a voice that carried the specific authority of someone who had never needed to raise it. And they filed out through the northern gate into Castillo and Rourke's control. The 3 who had arrived that week were visibly young, visibly scared, and looked at Orlov with expressions that told a complicated story about what he had been to them. He didn't look back at them. Yeo established communications with Extraction, and Hendricks ran the perimeter check with the focused efficiency that Emma had come to expect from her. Rourke managed the personnel with the unhurried professionalism of someone who had done this kind of thing before and had learned that the patience required was not optional. Emma stood near Orlov throughout, not as a guard. He had not been formally restrained yet, at his own request, pending the full surrender confirmation, but as the person he had agreed to surrender to. He was quiet. He watched his camp being systematically disassembled with an expression she couldn't fully read. "You built this in 8 months," she said at one point. "Your father taught me to work efficiently." "He taught you a lot of things." "Yes." He paused. "He taught me one thing he didn't know he was teaching." She waited. "He taught me that there was a different way to be than the way I came from." He didn't teach it as a lesson. He didn't know he was doing it. He just was a certain kind of person, and being around that for 6 weeks was, he seemed to locate the word, disorienting, in a way I couldn't account for. Emma looked at the cleared training ground, the defensive wall, the central structure that Yo was already running a signals check on. "And then you left and went back to the only thing you knew." "And then I left." He was quiet for a moment. "The second message I sent him, in 2007, I told him that what he'd given me had made everything harder, that before him I hadn't known there was another option. After him, I knew there was, and I still couldn't reach it. That is a specific kind of suffering." Emma thought about that, about knowing there was another option and not being able to reach it, about 5 years of carrying ammunition instead of doing the thing you were built to do, and telling yourself it was a choice when it was really a kind of paralysis. "He wrote about that message," she said, "in his notes." "What did he write?" "He wrote that he didn't know how to answer it, that he'd thought about it for a long time." She paused. "He wrote that it was the letter he regretted most not responding to." Orlov was still for a moment. She watched him absorb it, watched something move through him that he managed with the same control he managed everything else, but not completely. "He should have responded," he said. "Yes, he should have." They stood in silence for a moment. Around them, the systematic processing of the camp continued. The extraction took most of the afternoon. By the time they reached the forward operating base that served as the operations logistics hub, the light had gone flat and gray, and the temperature had dropped another 6 degrees. Emma sat in the back of the transport vehicle with dried blood on her left palm, and the particular exhaustion that comes after sustained high-stakes focus releases its grip. Rourke was across from her. He had been quiet for most of the return. "Good call," he said. "Going down to the wall. It could have gone badly." "Could have. Didn't." He looked at her. "The assessment you made, about what he wanted, what the open position meant, that was experience talking, not training. Training shapes experience. Sure, but training doesn't give you the ability to read a man standing 800 meters away and know what he's thinking. That's something else." He paused. "Your father was good at that too, according to his program files." She looked at him. "You read his files." Callum shared relevant sections before the operation. He said it without apology. "Your father wrote about you in those notes more than he wrote about any other subject. Not directly. He kept the anonymity like you asked. But you're in there. Anyone who reads carefully enough can see it." Emma looked out the transport window at the passing rock face. The Iron Pass highlands were receding behind them. "What did you take from it?" she said. "That he was proud of you, and that he didn't know how to say it." Rourke settled back in his seat. "Those are the people who leave the biggest holes." She didn't answer. He didn't seem to require one. Oh, the debrief at the forward base started at 1900 and ran for 3 hours. Callum was thorough in the way she had come to expect. Systematic, without wasted questions, occasionally returning to a detail from an earlier answer to test its consistency. Marsh took documentation. Hendricks gave the tactical overview. Castillo and Rourke filled in the operational sequence. When it came to the wall conversation, Emma gave it in full. Callum listened without interrupting, which told her it was largely consistent with what Orlov had told his own debriefers in the separated session. "He identified you as the person he wanted to surrender to specifically," Callum said. "Yes. Not the team commander, not the intelligence officer. You." "Yes." "Why?" Emma considered how to answer. "Because I was the one whose opinion mattered to him. My father was gone. I was what remained of the relationship he was trying to," she searched for the word, "account for." Callum made a note. "The condition about individual assessment for his people. Did he indicate that was a deal breaker or a negotiating position?" "He told me if you didn't agree, he'd shoot first." She paused. "I assessed it as honest." "So did I." He made another note. "The intelligence he's providing is substantial. We're already running preliminary verification on the network contacts he named this afternoon. 2 of the 3 financial structures he identified are consistent with existing intelligence from separate sources." He looked up from his notes. "His cooperation appears genuine." "It is." Callum looked at her. "How do you know?" "Because he didn't surrender to avoid something. He surrendered to end something. Those are different motivations, and they produce different qualities of cooperation." Callum studied her for a moment. Then he made a final note and closed the folder. "There will be a full review board when we're back at Raven Ridge," he said. "Your role in the operation will be formally assessed. I'll be submitting my own evaluation." He paused. "I want you to know that my evaluation will reflect accurately what happened today." "I assumed it would." "Corporal Brooks." He said her name with a specificity that made her pay attention. "What happened today was not a good outcome because it went smoothly. It went as well as it did because you made several correct assessments under pressure that contradicted what your training, your orders, and tactical convention would have suggested. That's a particular kind of capability. It should be on record." She looked at him. "What happens to the record?" "That depends on decisions above my level." He gathered his materials. "But it exists. That matters." "What?" She found Hendricks outside the debrief room, leaning against the corridor wall with a cup of coffee that was probably her third of the evening. "You good?" Hendricks said. "Functional." "That's not the same thing." "No." Emma leaned against the wall beside her. "But it's what I've got right now." Hendricks was quiet for a moment. They stood in the corridor's institutional light, the sounds of the base moving around them. "The traverse," Hendricks said. 79 seconds. I clocked it. "I said 85. "You said 85 to make me more comfortable with it." She looked at Emma sideways. "I noticed." Emma said nothing. "I would have done the same thing," Hendricks said. It wasn't an accusation. When does your father stop being the reason you do things and start being just the reason you're good at them? Emma thought about Orlov standing in the cleared ground with his rifle down, about her father's notes, about the letter he hadn't answered. I don't know, she said. Maybe that's not how it works. Maybe they don't separate. Hendricks drank her coffee. Probably not, she agreed. They stood in silence for a while. Outside, the Iron Pass highlands were dark and still and 30 kilometers away. The transport back to Raven Ridge left at 600 the next morning. Emma sat in the forward cabin and slept for 3 hours, which was more than she expected and less than she needed. She woke as they were coming through the final approach to the outpost, the familiar geometry of the ridgeline appearing through the vehicle's narrow window. She had left here 12 days ago as something that didn't have a clean name. She was returning as something that still didn't have a clean name, but for different reasons. Hobbs was waiting at the landing zone when they arrived. He assessed the returning team with the look of a man counting his people before he let himself breathe. When he got to Emma, he held the assessment a moment longer. Clean extraction? He said. Clean enough, Hendricks said. Casualties? Castillo took a round off the rock face in the Eastern Exchange. Ricochet, not direct. She's fine. Yeo twisted his ankle on the ice shelf. Everything else is intact. Hendricks paused. Orlov is in federal custody. His camp is neutralized. The intelligence transfer has already started. Hobbs nodded slowly. He looked at Emma again. Pruitt was relieved this morning, he said. Emma went still. Sir? Administrative review, long time coming. He said it without particular weight, without making it about her specifically. Okafor is managing the supply function until a replacement is confirmed. A pause. I wanted you to know before you heard it from someone else. She processed this. It was not the dramatic moment she might have anticipated, if she had anticipated it. It was just information, delivered plainly, in a parking area in the cold morning air. Thank you, sir, she said. Don't thank me. It was overdue. He turned toward the operations building, then stopped. Callum called ahead. He told me what you did at the wall. She waited. Your father, Hobbs said, and then seemed to decide something. Would have done exactly the same thing. He went inside. Emma stood in the landing zone for a moment after everyone else had moved. The ridgeline above Raven Ridge was catching the early light, and the northern approach, the approach where, 3 weeks ago, everything had started to unravel into something new, was quiet and brown and ordinary-looking from this distance. She picked up her kit and went inside. Behind her, the helicopter that had brought them back lifted off and banked north, becoming smaller against the pale sky until it was gone, and the sound of it faded into the ambient noise of the mountain, which had been there before any of them arrived, and would be there long after. In her vest pocket, folded against the inner lining, was a single page she had taken from her father's program files before the operation. Not a technical document, not an assessment form. A letter he had drafted and never sent, addressed to no one by name. Beginning, there are things I should have said while I still had the opportunity. She had read it once. She would read it again when she was ready. She wasn't ready yet, but she was closer than she had been 3 weeks ago, which was something. The letter stayed folded in her vest pocket for 11 days. She was aware of it the way you are aware of something that requires a specific kind of readiness before you can engage with it honestly. Not avoidance exactly, but a recognition that the timing mattered, that reading it in the wrong state of mind would reduce it to words on a page rather than whatever it actually was. She had learned that kind of patience from her father. The irony of using his teaching to prepare herself to read his words was not lost on her, and she let it sit there without trying to resolve it. The 11 days were not quiet. The intelligence Orlov provided began generating results within 72 hours of his initial debrief. Callum communicated updates through Marsh, who communicated them to Hobbs, who shared the operationally relevant portions with the team at Raven Ridge in a series of briefings that grew progressively more detailed as the verification process confirmed what Orlov had told them. 3 financial nodes in the network were frozen. 2 additional training facilities in adjacent regions were identified and flagged for action by other units. A communication infrastructure that had been moving information between multiple armed groups for 4 years was disrupted in ways that Callum described, in his precise and understated way, as significant. The word significant, coming from Callum, Emma had learned to translate as considerable. She heard all of this and processed it, and went back to work because there was still work to do. The sniper team's equipment still needed maintaining. The operational assessments she had started contributing to still needed her attention. The mountain outside still had weather patterns that required reading, and the outpost's defensive positioning still had gaps that needed addressing. Okafor managed the supply function with the careful competence he brought to everything, and occasionally appeared in the corridor outside her new workspace, a room that had formerly been used for storage and had been cleared out and allocated to her without formal announcement, simply appearing on the assignment sheet one morning to ask her opinion on inventory decisions that were not technically her responsibility anymore. She gave the opinions, he implemented them. Neither of them made a production of the exchange. On the 4th day back, Vickers came to find her. His sling was gone. The shoulder was not fully healed. She could see it in the slight asymmetry of how he held himself, the way he favored the right side in movement without appearing to notice he was doing it. He sat in the chair across from her workspace and watched her work for a moment before speaking. "Callum sent me a summary of Iron Pass," he said. "I heard." "You went down the wall to meet him?" "Yes." "In person, at the perimeter, while his fighters were in uncertain alert status." He said it without inflection. "That's either the most tactically sound decision in this operation's history or the most reckless." "Probably both." "Yeah." He was quiet for a moment. "He asked about your father." She looked up. "What?" "Orlov, in the debrief." Vickers looked at her steadily. "They let me read partial transcripts. He talked about your father for almost 40 minutes, the training program, what he took from it, what he didn't take from it." A pause. "He said your father was the only person who ever treated him like his potential had a different direction than the one he came from." Emma put down what she was working on. "He also said," Vickers continued, "that the decision he made at Iron Pass, the open position, the rifle down, he'd been thinking about making it for approximately 3 years, and that he'd been unable to make it until he heard there was someone at Raven Ridge who shot the way Garrett Brooks's daughter would shoot." She sat with that for a moment. "He used that as his reason?" "That's what he told the debriefers." Vickers looked at her. "I don't know what that does for you hearing it, but it seemed like something you should know." Emma looked at her hands. The scrape on her left palm had scabbed and was beginning to fade. "It does something," she said. "I'm not sure what yet." "That's fair." He stood, adjusted his jacket with the slightly labored movement of a man compensating for a shoulder that wasn't quite right. "The review board is next Tuesday. For the record, I'm submitting a statement." "You don't have to do that." "I know." He moved toward the door. "I want the record to say what actually happened. That's not the same thing as doing it for you." He paused at the door. "The people on that board, some of them are going to look at what you did and see someone who operated outside her assigned role. I want them to also have something in the file that tells them what it looked like from the ground." He left. She sat in the empty room for a while after, the bass sounds moving around her, the mountain outside doing what mountains did, which was nothing and everything simultaneously. She pulled the letter out of her vest pocket. She set it on the workspace in front of her. She looked at it for a long time without opening it. Then she opened it. Her father's handwriting was exactly as she remembered it. Small, precise, slightly left-leaning, the handwriting of someone who had decided early on that legibility was a form of respect for the reader. He had written it on plain paper, not letterhead, which meant it had not been composed for official purposes. It had been composed for someone specific. The someone specific had no name in the letter's opening, but she knew within the first 3 lines who it was for. It was for Orlov. It was the answer to the 2007 message. Written, apparently, sometime after, she looked at the date marked in the upper corner in pencil, faint but readable, 6 weeks after receiving it. 3 years before her father died. She read it in full without stopping. He wrote about the program. He wrote about the 6 weeks in a way that was different from the official documentation, less structured, more honest, with the particular quality of someone who had spent years thinking about an experience and had finally decided to put the thinking on paper. He wrote that Orlov had been the most naturally gifted student he had ever taught, and that this had been, from the beginning, both a privilege and a source of unease that he hadn't known how to name at the time. He wrote, "I taught you skill. I did not teach you the framework in which skill is supposed to live. That was my failure, not yours. You came to me without the framework, and I assumed the teaching would provide it. It didn't. Skills without frameworks are just capabilities, and capabilities find their own direction if you don't give them one. I gave you the capability without the direction, and then I was surprised when the direction you found wasn't the one I would have chosen for you." He wrote about the second message. He wrote that he had read it 7 times and drafted 4 responses and discarded all of them because none of them said what he actually meant, which was that he was sorry, and that sorry was insufficient, and that the insufficiency of it had paralyzed him in a way he had not managed to think himself clear of. He wrote, "The worst thing I could have said was nothing. I said nothing. I have regretted this every year since." The letter ended there, not with a conclusion, not with a sign-off. It just stopped, mid-thought, the way things stop when the person writing them can't find the ending. He had never sent it. She sat with the letter for a long time. She had spent years building a particular structure of understanding around her father, his strengths, his failures, the argument, the silence, the cardiac event on a Tuesday morning in his workshop. The structure had been load-bearing. She had organized her understanding of herself partially around it, and the letter was not destroying the structure exactly, but it was showing her the places where her version of the structure had been wrong, and the places where it had been right, and the places where it had simply been incomplete. He had known he failed Orlov. He had known it and been unable to address it, and had died carrying it. He had also known he had a daughter who was the best shooter he'd ever trained, and he had let her walk away from a fight in the middle of one, and had died not knowing she would eventually walk back to it. She folded the letter carefully. She put it in the inside pocket of her jacket, closer to her than the vest pocket. That felt right, though she couldn't have explained exactly why. Then she went back to work. The review board convened on a Tuesday morning in the operations room, which had been rearranged for the purpose. The usual maps still on the walls, but the furniture reconfigured into something approximating formal, with 4 people seated on one side of a long table and the people being reviewed on the other. Hendricks went first, then Castillo, then Rourke. Emma went last. The board consisted of Hobbs, a colonel she hadn't met before named Ferris, who had arrived from a regional headquarters 2 days prior, Callum, and a uniformed JAG officer named Reyes, who was there to ensure procedural compliance. Ferris ran the questioning for the board's formal portions. He was in his mid-50s, with the manner of someone who had risen through an institution by never doing anything that the institution couldn't account for, and who therefore found certain things genuinely difficult to categorize. He found Emma genuinely difficult to categorize. "You were assigned as an ammunition supply specialist," he said. "Yes, sir." "You have no formal designation as a designated marksman, no qualification record in that capacity. No assignment to the sniper element." He looked at the papers in front of him. "Your qualification records from enlistment show standard rifle qualification. Nothing above." "That's correct, sir." "Can you explain that?" "I qualified at standard because that's what I needed to qualify at for my assigned role. The evaluation didn't ask for more." Ferris looked at her. "You're saying you deliberately underperformed on a military qualification evaluation." "I'm saying I performed at the level the evaluation required." A pause. Colonel Ferris and Colonel Hobbs exchanged a look that Emma couldn't fully read. "You then operated a Barrett M107A1 under combat conditions," Ferris continued, "outside your assigned role, without authorization from your immediate supervisor. Sergeant Pruitt was not available, sir. The situation was active." "Without authorization," he repeated, "and engaged multiple targets at distances ranging from approximately 820 to 1,140 meters with 17 rounds and 17 effective outcomes." She waited. "Corporal Brooks, In 23 years of reviewing operational assessments, I have encountered 3 people who could do what you appear to have done. He set the paper down. 2 of them had records that would have told me to expect it. Your record tells me nothing of the kind. My record reflects my assigned role, sir, not my background. And what is your background? She told him. Not the compressed version she had given Hobbs on the night of the attack, but the full version. The years of competition, her father's training program, the national championships, the international competitions, the argument, the withdrawal, the name change, the enlistment. She gave it plainly, without apology and without performance, the way you give information that is simply true and has stopped requiring justification. Ferris listened to all of it. He had a legal pad in front of him and wrote several things on it, and she didn't try to read them. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The decision to descend to the camp perimeter, he said. Walk me through the reasoning. She walked him through it. The tactical situation, the assessment of Orlov's signaling posture, the calculation about what the open position meant, the decision that the most productive outcome required direct engagement rather than a long-range resolution. She gave it in the language of operational reasoning, which was the language he understood, and she watched him follow it. You assessed the probability that it was a trap. Yes, sir. I assessed it as low, but not negligible. What put it at low? The geometry of the situation. If he wanted to trap the team's marksman, the traverse was a better opportunity. Cleaner lines, no witnesses from his camp's position. The open ground at the perimeter wall was visible from the ridge shelf and from my secondary position both. Conducting a trap in a location that your own people can observe limits your options. She paused. He also could have simply engaged us during the approach. The eastern volley was disciplined enough that he could have initiated it earlier and with broader coverage. He chose a narrow engagement that cleared his own position. That was intentional. Ferris looked at her. You read all of that from his behavior in real time? Yes, sir. In under 4 minutes? Yes, sir. He wrote something else on the legal pad. Callum, beside him, had not asked a question yet and did not look like he intended to. Reyes was documenting. Hobbs was watching Emma with the measured attention he brought to things that mattered. One more question, Ferris said. When you had the shot on Orlov, when he was standing in the open, before he made any contact with you, why didn't you take it? Emma looked at him steadily. Because Hendricks told me to hold. And if she hadn't? A pause. I don't know, Emma said. I'd like to believe I would have held anyway, but I can't tell you with certainty what I would have done if the order hadn't come when it did. She met his eyes. That's an honest answer. Ferris looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said. It is. The board's findings came back in 72 hours. Hobbs delivered them to Emma in his office, which was the same office, the same desk, the same maps on the wall, but felt different from every previous time she'd sat across from him. Something had shifted in the room's atmosphere, or in her relationship to it, or both. He slid a single page across the desk. She read it. The formal findings commended her actions on the night of the attack as an effective response to an active threat under ambiguous authorization conditions. The Iron Pass operation was assessed as achieving primary and secondary objectives, with her performance in the designated marksman role rated as exceptional. The language around the perimeter wall decision was careful. It acknowledged the unconventional nature of the action and noted that it produced the optimal outcome while carrying significant personal risk, and recommended that future operational protocols for similar situations be reviewed to provide clear authorization pathways. It did not censure her. At the bottom of the page, in a section labeled Recommendations, was a single paragraph. She read it twice. You've seen the bottom section, Hobbs said. Yes, sir. The recommendation is mine. Callum signed off, Ferris signed off, which, I'll be honest with you, surprised me slightly. He leaned back. An instructor position at Lancer School. Long-range marksmanship, advanced level. They've been wanting to build out the curriculum for 3 years and haven't found the right person to build it. Lancer School. She knew the name. Everyone in this field knew the name. It was where the best shooters went to become the people who shaped the next generation of best shooters. This isn't a lateral move, she said. No, It involves a formal redesignation, a rank review, and a relocation. He looked at her. It also involves doing the thing you actually know how to do, in a context where it produces the most lasting value. A pause. Your father ran a marksmanship training program for 8 years. He built shooters who built other shooters. That's a specific kind of legacy. It doesn't end with the person. Emma looked at the recommendation. The language was precise and formal, and underneath it was something she hadn't expected to feel looking at a piece of institutional documentation. Recognition. Not of what she'd done in the last weeks, of what she had always been. I want some time to think about it, she said. You have 30 days, Hobbs said. Take 29 if you need them. She took 12. The 12 days were not a period of uncertainty exactly. They were more a period of letting something settle that had been in motion for a long time and needed to slow down before she could see it clearly. She worked. She ran the ridge twice in the early mornings when the light was still gray and the air had the cold, clean quality of something unused. She had conversations she needed to have. She went to see Vickers on the 9th day. He was in the range, the Outpost's limited but functional indoor range, 25 meters, used primarily for maintenance qualification, dry firing with his left arm, working the shoulder back into service with the careful patience of someone who understood that healing was not a process you could accelerate through will. He heard her come in and didn't stop what he was doing until he'd completed the sequence he was running. "How's it feeling?" she said. "Like someone put a round through it." He set the weapon down. "Better than last week. Still not good." He looked at her. "You hear from the board?" "I got the findings." "And the recommendation?" "Yes." He turned to face her fully. "You're going." She looked at him. "Is it that obvious?" "It's obvious that you'd be an idiot not to." He said it without any surrounding softness. "And whatever else you are, you're not an idiot." He picked up the weapon again. "Lancer needs someone who can teach the way you shoot, not the mechanics. There are plenty of people who can teach mechanics, the thinking, the reading, the assessment under pressure." He worked the action. "That's rarer." "I've never taught anyone." "Your father did." "My father had 20 years of practice." "Your father also had a first class." He glanced at her. "So will you." She was quiet for a moment. "I thought it would feel like a clear decision." "Why?" "Because it's obviously the right one." "Right decisions don't feel clear," Vickers said. "Right decisions feel true. Those are different things. Clear means uncomplicated. True means it costs something, but it's still where you're supposed to go." He lowered the weapon. "Does it feel true?" She thought about Lancer, about a classroom, about students she hadn't met, about a curriculum that didn't exist yet, about building something rather than maintaining something, about her father and 8 years of a training program and the shooter he had built who had eventually stood in an Iron Pass clearing with his rifle pointed at the ground. "Yes," she said. "Then you already know." She told Hobbs the next morning. He thanked her for informing him before the 30 days were up, which was as close to enthusiasm as he typically got, and immediately began the paperwork for the formal transition. She told Okafor that evening. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "You're going to be terrifying in that role." "That's not exactly what I was going for." "I mean it as a compliment." He looked at her. "The students who get you as an instructor, they're going to become something different than what they would have been otherwise. That matters." He hesitated. "It's what you do. You change the picture of a situation just by being in it. You did that here." She was not sure what to do with that. She nodded once, which was the best she could manage. She told Hendricks in the operations room, and Hendricks said good in the flat, economical way she said most things, and then said, "If you ever need a field reference, use my name." Emma said she would. She did not tell Castillo and Rourke in person because they had already rotated back to their unit. She heard through Marsh that the debrief materials had been forwarded and that both of them had provided supplementary statements about the Iron Pass operation that would go into the permanent record. She appreciated this and did not have a way to convey the appreciation directly, so she let it sit. On the 15th day back from Iron Pass, Callum appeared at the outpost for what he said was a routine follow-up visit, and was clearly something slightly more than that. She met with him in the small room that had become her workspace, the room that was about to stop being hers. He sat across from her desk and looked at the modest amount of personalization she had applied to the space over the past weeks. 2 maps pinned to the wall, a notebook, the Barrett's cleaning kit that she had been maintaining without anyone asking her to. Orlov's full debrief concluded yesterday, he said. Results? Substantial. The network disruption is more significant than early assessment suggested. 3 additional cells in separate regions have been identified. 2 of them would have been operational within 90 days. He looked at his hands. The intelligence services of 2 allied nations have expressed formal appreciation for the cooperation. He said it in the tone of someone reading from a document. In unofficial terms, the information he provided may have prevented several hundred casualties over the next 18 months. Emma absorbed this. What happens to him? Secure facility, extended legal process. There are charges from multiple jurisdictions, which makes it complicated. His cooperation is being weighed. Callum looked at her. He asked me to give you something. He placed a folded sheet on her desk. She looked at it. What is it? I don't know. He wrote it by hand and folded it before I took it. I didn't read it. He paused. He asked that it be given to you specifically and not processed through the formal record. I honored that request. She picked it up, didn't open it. He also said, Callum continued, that the decision you made at the wall, not taking the shot when you had it, he wanted you to know that he understood what it cost you to make it. His words. A pause. He said that the only person he had ever met who could make that decision under those conditions was your father, and that apparently it was something that could be passed on. She sat with that. Is that accurate? Callum said. From your perspective? I don't know, she said honestly. I know I almost took it. Almost is different from did. Yes, he stood. The recommendation to Lancer School is good, Corporal, for what it's worth from my professional assessment. He picked up his jacket. The students who end up in your program are going to get something that most programs don't provide. Which is? He looked at her. A teacher who understands that the most important thing about precision isn't the precision. He said it simply, like something he had been thinking for a while and had found the words for. Safe travels. He left. She sat with the folded sheet in her hands for a while. Then she opened it. Orlov had written in English, probably because he understood it was the language she would read most easily, and possibly because the formality of a second language gave him a useful distance from what he was trying to say. He had written, I spent 30 years believing that what your father gave me was a weapon. I was wrong about that. He gave me a standard. I failed it for a long time. At the end, I tried to meet it. Whether that matters is not for me to decide. He would have been proud of you at the wall, not because you held the shot, because you knew why you were holding it. That is the thing he was always trying to teach. Most people never learn it. She folded the letter and placed it with the other one in the inside pocket of her jacket. 2 letters. One sent too late. One that had taken 30 years to become possible. Her father's handwriting and the handwriting of the man her father had taught, arriving together at the end of something that had been in motion since before she was born. She sat in the small room that had been her workspace for a few weeks and looked at the maps on the wall and the notebook on the desk and thought about her father in his workshop on a Tuesday morning, working alone, the way he had worked most of his life, absorbed, precise, not knowing that the morning was going to be his last. She thought about what she would have said to him if she'd had the chance. She had been constructing versions of that conversation for 5 years, and none of them had ever reached a satisfying end, because the conversation was impossible, and she had known it was impossible, and had kept constructing it anyway, which was probably the most human thing she had ever done. She let go of the construction now. Not with resolution, she was not sure resolution was what happened to losses like this, but with something that was at least adjacent to it. The acceptance that the conversation was never going to happen and that the teaching had happened anyway, and that the teaching was in her hands and her eyes and her ability to read a landscape and hold a breath and know when not to pull a trigger, and that this was real in a way the imagined conversation would never have been. He had taught her. She had carried it. She was going to pass it on. That was enough. It was more than enough. She left Raven Ridge on a gray morning 3 weeks later, which was earlier than the formal transition date, but aligned with a transport window that Hobbs said not to miss. Her gear fit in 2 bags, which was approximately the right amount for a person who had been carrying a hidden life, alongside the official one for long enough that the two had finally merged into something that only needed 1 set of luggage. Okafor carried one of the bags to the transport vehicle without being asked. She let him. Hendricks shook her hand at the landing zone. The handshake was firm and lasted exactly as long as it needed to. Vickers was at the range when she left, still working the shoulder back into service, still patient about it. She went to the range to say goodbye, and he looked up from what he was doing and said, "You're going to be good at this." "I know," she said, which surprised them both slightly. He laughed, a short, real laugh, the first time she'd heard it from him. "Yeah," he said. "Okay then." She walked out to the transport. The helicopter took her north and then west, and Raven Ridge became small below her and then disappeared into the terrain as the angle changed, and she watched it go without looking away until it was completely gone. Lancer School was in a valley surrounded by mountains that were different from Raven Ridge's mountains. Lower elevation, more green, with a weather pattern that ran to fog in the mornings and cleared by midday. The facility was larger than she'd expected, which shouldn't have surprised her. She'd known its reputation, but the physical scale of it was different from the abstraction she had carried in her head. Her first week was orientation, curriculum review, introductions to the staff and the administrative structure. She was given an office and a classroom and a range allocation and a list of students who would be in her first cohort, 12 people from various branches and backgrounds, due to arrive in 3 weeks. She spent the 3 weeks building the curriculum. She had never built a curriculum before. She found that the process had a great deal in common with planning an operation. You started with the objective, worked backward through the necessary conditions, identified the gaps, built the route. The difference was that the objective here was not a specific outcome, but a specific capability. Students who understood that precision was a means, not an end. Students who could hold a shot as well as they could take one. She drew on her father's notes, which she had read in their entirety by now, across multiple evenings, annotating the margins in her own handwriting. His voice was present in the notes in a way that his physical voice no longer could be, and she found herself in conversation with it, agreeing with some of it, pushing back on other parts, developing positions that extended beyond where he'd stopped. She also drew on things she hadn't expected to draw on. The conversation at the wall, Orlov's debrief, the portions Callum had shared with her. The understanding, arrived at through a specific kind of experience that couldn't be manufactured, of what it meant to build a capability in someone without building the framework around it. She built the framework into the curriculum from the first day. Her first cohort arrived on a Monday morning in November. 12 people in a room, 12 different levels of existing ability, and 12 different ideas about what they were there to learn. She stood at the front of the room and looked at them and felt the particular quality of a beginning. Not comfortable, not settled, but alive in the way that things are alive when they're just starting. "My name is Emma Brooks," she said. "I'm going to be your instructor for the next 16 weeks. Before we start, I want to tell you something about what this program is and what it isn't." She paused. "This is not a program about how to shoot. You can already shoot or you wouldn't be here. This is a program about understanding what shooting is for, and what it costs, and when it applies and when it doesn't." She looked at the room. "The most important skill I'm going to teach you doesn't happen behind a scope. It happens in the moment between acquiring a target and making the decision about what to do next. That moment is where most errors occur. That moment is where most of the significant outcomes of your career are going to be determined." She let that sit for a second. "We're going to spend a lot of time in that moment. Some of you are going to find it uncomfortable. That's not a problem. That's the point." A young corporal in the third row, she had already noted him as someone who was trying to project more certainty than he felt, which was a recognizable mode, raised his hand slightly. "What if the situation doesn't give you time for a moment? What if it's just react?" "That's a good question," she said. "The answer is that the training creates the moment. You don't find the moment under pressure, you build it in advance through so much repetition that the decision-making becomes part of the mechanical sequence rather than something that happens after it. She looked at him. Your father teach you to shoot? He blinked. Yes, ma'am. What did he tell you about it? He thought for a second. He said patience was the job. That's exactly right, she said. Your father was smart. We're going to find out if some of it transferred. The room shifted slightly. Not laughter, but something close to it, a relaxation of the stiffness that first mornings carry. She felt the room's temperature change, and noted it and moved forward. 6 months later, on a Saturday in late spring, she drove 4 hours to a cemetery in the flatlands west of the city where her father had spent the last decade of his life. She had been here once, at the burial, and had not been back. She had not been back because she hadn't been ready, and then because she had been somewhere that made coming back logistically difficult, and then because there was always a reason not to do the things that cost the most. She had run out of reasons. His headstone was simple, his name, the dates, a single line that she had chosen because it was accurate and because he would not have wanted anything ornate. The grass around it had been kept. She hadn't arranged for that, which meant someone else had, and she spent a moment wondering who before deciding it didn't matter. She had brought the medal that had come through the formal review process, a commendation for the actions at Raven Ridge, Iron Pass identified by reference rather than name. The physical object was smaller than medals always seemed to be in imagination, a modest piece of metal and ribbon that felt strange in her hand. She set it at the base of the headstone. She stood there for a while. She didn't have prepared remarks. She had thought about preparing remarks and had not been able to, because the things she wanted to say resisted being prepared. It wanted to be said in the moment or not at all. The curriculum is working, she said. First cohort finished 8 weeks ago. 3 of them are already in the field. 2 of them are good enough that I told them so, which I make a point of not doing easily. She paused. You would have liked the approach I built. I kept some of yours and changed some of yours and added things neither of us had when we were here before. She looked at the headstone. I read the letter, both of them. I understand why you didn't send it. I wish you had. The wind moved through the cemetery trees, a low ambient sound, the kind of sound that doesn't demand anything. I'm not angry anymore, she said. I was for a long time. I was angry about the argument, and I was angry about the silence after, and I was angry about the Tuesday morning and all of it. I don't think the anger was wrong. I think it was just too heavy to keep carrying. She stopped. I put it down. I'm not sure exactly when. Somewhere between the North Tower and the Iron Pass wall, I think. She was quiet for a moment. I found someone who needed what you tried to give him, she said. He'd been carrying it wrong for 30 years. He found a way to put it down too. That's your work. That's what you built, even in the places where you didn't know you were building. She stood at the grave until the afternoon light started to shift, and the cemetery's long shadows began reaching across the grass. Then she picked up the medal. She had brought it to leave it, and she found, standing there, that she didn't want to leave it. Not because she needed to keep it, but because keeping it meant something different than she'd originally thought. It wasn't a trophy. It was a record. Evidence of a specific chain of events that had started before her birth and had run through her father and through Orlov and through 17 rounds on a dark ridge and a wall conversation in the mountain cold and a curriculum being built in a valley school. She put the medal in her jacket pocket beside the 2 letters. She walked back to her car across the quiet cemetery in the late afternoon light, carrying the weight of all of it. The losses, the lessons, the students waiting for her in 3 days, the years ahead, the work. The weight was real. She didn't set it down. She just carried it differently than she had before. That was what her father had spent a lifetime trying to teach her, and Orlov, and every student who had sat across from him and learned to put their eye to a scope. Not how to pull the trigger, how to decide what the trigger was for. Some people spend their whole lives running from the thing they're meant to carry. The ones who find their way back don't do it by becoming fearless. They do it by learning that the weight, held right, is what makes you strong enough to protect something worth protecting.